おはようございます。全然掃除してます。めっちゃ楽しい。
Yeah, you just were touching on something. You were talking about the agility of healthcare across the country, which really led you to start Serum. In your work, you often confront systems that are not easy to change or that aren't fair. And you've witnessed, as you shared, families that are making impossible choices between being able to afford medicine, being able to get food on the table for dinner. These are issues we're all hearing about every day on our news, too. How do you counsel others who see systems working against the greater good, or perhaps are plagued by injustice, but wonder, do they really have the power to make any change?
I think that's a very timely question. What do you do in your own community? What do you do in this state? What do you do in the country? Whatever level you're looking at. And I think Serum has really shown me the power of getting out there and just getting stuff done. We started as a very ragtag, like this started as a student project, and has grown now to the largest redistributor of unused medicine. But sometimes it's literally just picking up the phone and calling a local legislator. So, for example, we actually were able to launch a home delivery pharmacy in the state of Georgia. But the way that happened was literally we got an email from a retired person in Georgia, and we got one of these emails that was like, I think it was like all purple font. So we were like, how legitimate is this? You know, everyone knows those emails that you get in inbound. So you're like, hello at Serum. And we were like, this may or may not be legitimate. A concerned citizen that says, hey, how do I make this happen in my state? Emailed us in, called his local legislature, got us a meeting with the chair of health and with the chair of public health in the Georgia legislature. That was the beginning. That was the spark. So I think like we can actually trace back in every area that we're working in this country. It was usually just one person who was concerned. It was a concerned pharmacist who saw unused medicine. It was just a random person who read an article about us and said, hey, I want to do something. What can I do? And we said, if you can get us a meeting with the state, that would be awesome. And like from that moment of just them calling their legislator to say, hey, I want to see this program happen, we were able to make inroads. So I think that it can feel very, I think a lot of it is just it's unclear what is the path forward. You don't have to know every step, but doing something rather than nothing, choosing action over apathy. I think it just bears out, and I've just seen this multiple times. The value of an email or a phone call and what it can be to changing fundamentally the destiny of our organization, but also our ability to serve tens of thousands of more patients.
そうですね。持ってはいるんだけど、この植物の行き場所に悩んでんだけど、どうしたらいいですか？植物の行き場所がわからなくなってきて、でかくなりすぎちゃった。どうする？この植物。この植物どうすればいいですか？俺って超大人気。マンゴーちゃんがいるからね。But there are also many problems in our lives that we're hoping for a solution for. We actually have something that we can do to help to solve that problem. And as Kia mentioned, it may be that we can, call a state legislator, or maybe it's that we can post something on social media to raise awareness about a problem. But there are tangible things we can do. But I think it all starts at reflecting on what are you hoping for, what are you wishing for, and I think that's a great place to start with what you should be doing every day.
And you call that in your TED Talk actionable hope, right? That it's not enough to just hope for something more, to say, well, in 6 months or in a year, right? So maybe talk a little bit about that.
That's right. I realize there's this circuit, and it all starts with hope. And what are you hoping for? And that hope really needs to drive action. And if that hope drives action, what I've found is it often will drive impact. And well, what is impact? It gives you more things to be hopeful for. It gives you more hope. You get this incredible circuit: hope, action, impact. Leads to more hope, action, impact. And all of a sudden, years later, you're sitting here with these two amazing people and all of you, and able to share about an organization every year that's saving lives of patients all over the world. It all starts with that first hope in terms of action and impact.
I know we're going to talk about a lot today, but for every cure and serum, like how can people be part of it or support the work that you're doing?
Sure, I'm happy to start. Yeah, absolutely. So many of us in this room have received medicines for diseases that they're not approved for to treat us, called off-label use. In fact, 20 to 30% of all prescriptions in the U.S. every day are off-label. So doctors are trying drugs for diseases they're not intended for. Unfortunately, it happens very randomly, and there are a lot more opportunities for used systematically, but it's just not profitable in our system.
誰かこの植物をまっすぐ伸ばす方法を教えてください。
So unfortunately, the system isn't built for this to find new uses for medicine. But the reason I share that as background is that means that most of you all have received a
植
drug
物
that
が
wasn't
まっすぐ
intended for. And
立た
even
ない。
some of you, you can go to every.org/ideas.
なんで
About a drug you've
こい
received
つ曲がっちゃうんだけど、なんで曲がっちゃうのかな。困っちゃうな。
how is it ranking versus all of
ま
our
っす
other
ぐ上に
medicines?
伸びてくれ。
The second is you have to support us
頼む。
financially. We run large clinical trials, and they're expensive, and we have patients all over the world. And finally, awareness raising is really important. We find treatments for diseases that we never would have imagined, like lidocaine for breast cancer, or DFMO for Bach-Buck syndrome. And amazingly, the problem for a lot of these medications is just awareness, just getting that drug to the patient. It's a matter of letting patients and doctors know, so helping to spread the word that our work at everything.
For us, there's an opportunity if you have,
これで
in some instances, individuals can actually donate their unused medicine as long as they're in sealed containers, unexpired, da 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 da. So there's an opportunity for you to potentially donate. The other thing I was just saying is this is TED. Like y'all are
いやもうマンゴーちゃんがなんかやっぱ一番安定っていうか、一番安定しますね、本当に。昨日一人三役ぐらい、茶太郎が一人三役ぐらいで俺のチャットに来て、なんか気持ち悪かったよ、なんか本当に。一人でなんか自作自演みたいなのずっとやってたよ。昨日夜中、茶太郎。あいつアホだよね、本当に。俺が傷つくとでも思ったのかな。全然なんともなんでどうだね。
So maybe talk a little bit, Kia, about how you kind of rationalize those feelings of the pain and the gain.
I feel like hope is a tough concept for me because I am a probably realistic, pragmatic pessimist. I don't think anyone who's ever worked with me would say he is a hopeful, optimistic human, which is kind of a weird thing to say considering I'm doing social entrepreneurial work and trying to have impact in this world. So like, why am I doing this? And how do I get up every day and continue to do it? And I think a lot of it comes down to like, when you are having personal experience, when you are living at the edge and you're like, I just gotta put one foot in front of the other. I gotta make sure I have what I need. I have to make sure there's a roof over my head. I have to make sure there's electricity. The electricity not cut off. Like, you're really thinking about the hopes and dreams of the future that you want to have. You're thinking about living today and making food tomorrow. But I think that in and of itself, I've realized, is a form of hope. Because you do not just lay down and die. Candidly, like, and this is something I say to myself that I'm not an optimistic person. I'm not a very hopeful person. Well, Kia, you have options, and hopefully you choose to make this world a better place and to keep
やべえ。
going. And I think that what you referenced around, like, so how do I make this all work in my head is at the end of the day, now that I am not in that situation where I am worried about basic needs, like, it's such a to really choose the hard things in your life. For so many people in this world, that is not a choice that they have. That thing is sitting right in front of them, staring at them every single day. So the fact that I have food on the table,
やべえ。
good
顔
health
色の
insurance, a roof over
超
my
レアな
head,
写真出てきた。
I get to now choose
うわ、か。
what are the things that I'm going to take on that are hard. And so, like, I reflect on that, especially now, being on a stage like this, in a room like this, what a privilege it is for me to choose hard things and to go out and tackle those. And all of us in this room, I think, mostly probably have the ability to choose the hard things that you're going to tackle in your life. You can choose career. You can choose to start a new job. You can choose to start a new organization. Like, these are all choices that we have, and it's a privilege of choice. And so I think for me, that is what gives me more hope, and that lights a fire under me, is this idea of every day I get to wake up and choose to go out into this world and tackle some of these systems of oppression, systems of inequality. And so, like, what a beautiful life that is, to be able to wake up every day and be at Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the top, working on self-actualization.
David, for people who are navigating some of that crossroads that you're talking about, a big change, maybe it's you want to start an organization or change jobs, but for those of us who might be in that place but feeling a little bit stuck, what small, like, everyday choices or mindsets do you share with people to kind of help them move forward or build like a more meaningful path?
Sure. I think there's three things that can really help you during a really tough time. And I learned this from the 6 months that I spent in the intensive care unit when I was dying from my disease, Castleman's. And the first is that you have to have a vision for what you're fighting for. So you have to be able to actually see what is it that you want and that you're wishing and hoping for. So for me, I was wishing and hoping for a family with my girlfriend at the time, Caitlin. I was wishing and hoping that I would be able to find drugs in memory of my mom and treat patients in her memory. That vision was so important for me as I was struggling to survive for those 6 months. The second is that you have to have an amazing team of people by your side. My sisters literally held both my hands 8 hours a day for those 6 months, giving me the strength I need. My dad sat with me, my girlfriend was there with me as well. They provided strength and support. And of course, when you think about it from a professional perspective, the team that you have around you is everything, right? It's so important. It's really everything. And the third is you have to take things one step at a time. So if someone had come to me at the beginning of that 6 month period and said, David, you're going to suffer the most unbearable pain you've ever felt. You're going to be on the brink of death for 6 months. And say goodbye to your family. I would have said, there's no way I have the strength to make it for 6 months. I would have said, where's the white flag? No way I can do that. But taking the approach of one step and one breath at a time helped me so much. I remember there was one point about 11 weeks into that illness where my doctors told me that we were out of options, and I started slowing my breathing. It was so painful to breathe, and I was starting to let go. And I remember looking up at my sister and everyone else that said goodbye. Say goodbye to all the people that I love. And my sister looked at me and said, just breathe, Dave, just breathe. And I remember hearing that, and I was like, you know what? I can do like maybe 1 or 2 more breaths. Like, let's go. And a couple more. I can do a minute of this. I can do an hour of this. And those couple of hours to couple of days were the difference for the time we needed for the chemotherapy to take to save my life. And so I think with all these challenges that we face, if you can have the vision for the future, the support by your side, and really take things one step or one breath at a time, I think you can overcome so much.
Resilience is a topic that's been touched on a lot over these last couple days, and I think that the perception often is that social entrepreneurs or leaders are always full of hope, like always ready to go forward and conquer more. Like, is that how it feels to you? Do you always feel that way?
Yeah, I'm right with you. I'm like I'm a very optimistic human in a lot of ways on a daily basis. But it's interesting. I don't know that I have always hope. I I know that I have faith, and I know that I have faith weirdly in this country. I have faith in humanity, and I think going back to what is the vision that we want to see, and what is the world we want to live in, like it's much better for me, and I can wake up and be happy and recharged thinking about this world and humanity as a race that is ultimately going to save itself than it is to think about this country or humanity as a race that's going to implode and destroy itself. So I don't think I think like we're a lot of us are
週
tired.
間に1
People
回
are
簡
tired.
単にさせると7
And
週。
at the same time,
潜って見てたよ、チャッ
distant
タ
I think you had mentioned previously.
いや、あいつやばいよね。一人3、4役ぐらいやってたよね。もうなんかあいつのパターン分かってきてる。分かってきたやつがあいつマジ頭いかれてるよ、ほんと。そこまでしてよく俺と絡む。俺以外にもやってんだろうけど、さあ、なんかあいつほんと精神病だよね。なんか精神的になんか病んでるよね、あいつ絶対。本当になんかあいつ一回やばい、なんか、ある意味心配するよね、本当に。あいつマジなんか犯罪とかおかしそうだよ、そのうち。それかなんかもう、さあなんか、あいつマジイかれてるよ、本当。ね、昨日なんか死ぬ話とかしたけど、なんか、あいつが死んだところで、喜ぶやつもいないんじゃないの？誰も気づかないんじゃないの？あいつ死んだところ。ほんとそんぐらいのレベルだ、あいつ。Hey, Raisa. Raisa, how are you? 最近よく来るね。あなたどこの人なの？一体。Where are you from? いつも言葉がわかんないっすよ。二人のやりとりおもろかったよ。いや、おもろいんだったらいいけどさ。おもろかったらいいんだけどさ。あいつはやばいよね。Oh my gosh. でもだいぶ綺麗になってきた、奥が。Diseases that we're working on so hard and want treatment so bad and we just can't find them. And so I think that when you bring all those together, it's the excitement of life and the fact that we're all here and it's amazing. The excitement to be able to help people that shouldn't be here that are living what we call overtime. But it's also sitting with the pain of the patients we're not able to help, sitting with the pain of the diseases that we're not able to treat yet, and having that pain drive further action.
What is one thing that you would leave people with, or like an action that people can take to start to like make change in their life starting today?
I think we're in an incredible moment where thinking about what really matters to you, what really matters, not the things, there's a million things that everyone says that they care about, right? Because like to be a good human, to be a good person, you must care about a lot of things, you must do all the things, you must vote, you must recycle, you must go to see your dentist every 6 months. Like there's all these things that we all have to do. I think there's too much. There's so many things. It's so hard to feel like you are a good person that is doing good things. And I think this is a time I've really been thinking about this because I have a new priority, which is I have a child now. It's how do I focus on the things that actually really matter? And for me, it's understanding more authentically for myself. What are the things that like for me it's less it's again it's like what are the things that bother me? What are the things that anger me? What are the things I'm excited about? Like for me it's all about the strong emotions that come out. And how do I focus my life and my work and my mission on impacting those? And it's going to have to, for me, the way I choose to do that is going deep in a couple areas and having to maybe say, I maybe didn't go to the dentist in the last 6 months, and like I'm okay with that. Like maybe I'm taking a break from some of these things because I want to focus on these others. So I think it's really just understanding for you what are the things that actually deeply matter and taking action on those, because it's a recognition you can't do everything. And I'm a person who wants to do everything. And so I think rather than being really sad about that, it's using that as the empowering statement to myself to say, I can't do everything, but the things I'm going to do really well. I'm going to be really focused, and I'm going to see impact in those areas.
But it is very important to go to the dentist every 6 months. Don't forget that. David, just quickly.
Sure. So I completely agree with Kia's points. And one way that I've sort of framed this in a way that's really helpful for me is that I've considered the moment that I nearly died for the first time to be sort of my overtime. And overtime is a sense that many of us can relate to. So think about the end of a sporting event where the game goes to overtime. And like if you're playing in one of those games, it can be really scary to be overtime because like at any minute the game could end. If you make a mistake in overtime, the game is over. Make a mistake in the first half of the game, you can make up for it. So overtime can be really scary. But overtime can also be really clarifying. When you're in overtime, you focus only on the things that are most important to win whatever that score is. I found for me that I've been in overtime now for 15 years. I guess I'm in my third overtime right now. But in this overtime, it helps me to sort of cut out the noise, the things that I don't care about, the things that aren't important to me, and to just focus on the things that are really, really important to me. And so I think that when I was 25, sort of first realized that we're all in overtime. Because we're all in overtime. And none of us know how long our overtime is going to go for. But all of us have the ability to make the most of every second of overtime.
What a great way to end. David, yeah, thank you so much for a great conversation. Until next time.
That was David Feigenbaum, Gia Williams, and Alexandra Tilton in conversation at TEDx in 2025. If you're curious about TED's curation, find out more at TED.com/curation guidelines. And that's it for today. TED Talks Daily is part of the TED Audio Collective. This talk was fact-checked by the TED Research Team and produced and edited by our team: Martha Estefanos, Oliver Friedman, Brian Allen, Lucy Little, and Tansuka Learningbom. This episode was mixed by Christopher Basie-Pogue. Additional support from Emma Topner and Daniela Valarusa. I'm Elise Q. I'll be back tomorrow with a fresh idea for your feed. Thanks for listening. MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin are household names. But what about their mothers?
The work that they were doing even before their children arrived, of creating, of acting, was shaping our nation. And they deserve to be celebrated for that.
Anna Malika Tubbs on the mothers who influenced American history. That's next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. Subscribe or listen to the TED Radio Hour wherever you get your podcasts.
Hallo, willkommen zurück beim Easy German Podcast. Heute mit Manuel Saalmann und Karina Schmidt,
Ja,
die
ja,
sich
verdammt,
immer
immer
noch
schneller,
in
ja.
Neuseeland befinden. Es ist schon eine Woche her, dass wir uns in diesem
Ja,
Format
voll.
getroffen haben. Die letzte Episode war ja
でもなん
mit
か、
und Janusz und dir
抜け殻がすごい。
vorproduziert. Das hatten wir natürlich vor eurer großen Reise aufgenommen.
Genau.
Wie war euer Wochenende, Kari, in Neuseeland und eure Woche?
Manuel, es war fantastisch. Ich habe dir dazu direkt mal einen Ausdruck der Woche mitgebracht. Ausdruck der Woche. Manuel, ich war am Wochenende unterwegs. Janusz und ich haben einen Wochenendausflug gemacht mit der Fähre von der Nordinsel Neuseelands auf die Südinsel. Und dort, ne, da haben wir so richtig die Seele baumeln lassen.
Die Seele baumeln lassen. Das bedeutet, ihr habt einfach mal gar nichts gemacht.
Richtig. Und zwar, also noch mehr, als wir es geplant hatten. Wir sind dort angekommen nach einer 3-stündigen Fährfahrt durch die Marlborough Sounds. Das sind so Fjorde, wo du durch die Berge fährst. Das war schon unfassbar schön. Und dann sind wir in diesem kleinen Ort angekommen und da war einfach nichts. Also da waren ein paar Geschäfte und ein paar Restaurants, aber man hatte das Gefühl, da ist die Welt einfach stehen geblieben. Und erst habe ich noch gedacht, was machen wir heute Nachmittag? Machen wir eine Fahrradtour? Und dann dachte ich, nee, dieser Ort ist so verdammt. Ich setze mich jetzt einfach an den Strand und lasse die Seele baumeln. Und ich dachte, das ist so ein schöner Ausdruck, den bringe ich heute mal mit und erkläre den. Was heißt denn baumeln, Manuel?
Ja, baumeln. Ich denke da als erstes, kennst du das, manche Leute hängen sich im Auto an den Rückspiegel so ein Luftbäumchen. Kennst du die Dinger?
Das machen nur die Deutschen, oder?
Das ist vielleicht ein deutsches Ding. Es gibt also ein anderes Beispiel ist vielleicht der Schmuck am Tannenbaum. Also etwas, was ein Gewicht hat und an einem Faden runterhängt.
Ja.
Das baumelt in dem Moment, wo es bewegt wird. Also deswegen musste ich an den Rückspiegel denken, weil das Auto bewegt sich und dadurch baumelt das die ganze Zeit so nach links und rechts. Ein schönes Wort, baumeln.
Baumeln auf Englisch?
Keine Ahnung. Baumeln auf Englisch.
Dangle.
Ah ja, Dangle. Ja, stimmt.
Genau. Und was ist die Seele?
Seele?
いや、やっぱ俺もう一回カメラマンに戻ろうか。
Das ist halt, da
やっ
müssen
ぱ
wir
俺
jetzt ja
写真とか撮ったり
philosophiert
する方、一人でなんかそう
abspielen.
いう
Also das ist
一人
das,
の
was
世界
uns
に入ってる方が
vielleicht
楽し
als
いかもしれないね。
Mensch macht. Das, was nicht nur unser
作
Körper
品
ist,
作ったりさ。
nicht nur unser Gehirn, sondern unsere Seele ist auch
カメラマンに
natürlich
戻ろう
ein philosophischer, ein religiöser Gedanke, aber man findet natürlich die Seele.
Ja, sowas wie Spirit oder Soul.
Genau.
Und das ist doch ein wunderschöner Ausdruck, oder? Wenn man wirklich nichts macht
Ja.
und einfach nur da sitzt und den Moment genießt und keine Pläne hat, dann lässt man die Seele baumeln.
Das ist ein wunderschönes Bild. Ja, die Seele baumelt irgendwie und erholt sich und muss mal nichts machen.
Richtig. Und genau das habe ich gemacht dann. Ich habe den ganzen Nachmittag einfach nur nichts gemacht, Manuel. Nicht mal Musik gehört, Podcast, nicht gearbeitet, nicht Sport gemacht. Ich habe einfach nur da gesessen an diesem kleinen Strand und in diesem kleinen Hafen und habe mich erinnert, wie du mir erzählt hast von deiner Freundin Nora. Vielleicht erinnerst du dich noch. Du warst mal fasziniert von ihr und hast gesagt, sie saß einfach nur auf dem Sofa und hat nichts gemacht. Weißt du das noch?
Ja, klar.
Das geht mir nicht aus dem Kopf. Liebe Grüße, Nora, falls du zuhörst. Und seitdem sehe ich das so richtig als einen zu erreichenden Zustand an, dass ich irgendwo sitze und so glücklich bin, dass ich einfach nichts mache. Und genau das habe ich
何語
gemacht. Das Wetter war perfekt, es war nicht zu heiß, nicht zu kalt. Ich saß in der Sonne, es wehte ein leichtes Lüftchen. Ich hatte gar keine Wünsche mehr offen und habe die Seele baumeln lassen.
Schön.
Support for NPR and the following message come from the Kaufman
脳
Foundation,
みそを垂れ流
providing
しパイ
access
ロッ
to
ト。
opportunities that help people achieve
いや、
financial
久しぶ
stability,
り。
upward mobility, and economic
元気
prosperity,
ですさ。
regardless
元
of
気し
race,
ます
gender, or geography. Kaufman.org
掃除始まると楽しいね。
is the
掃
TED
除し
Radio
だすと止まんないね。
Each week, groundbreaking TED Talks are delivered at TED conferences to bring about the future we want to see around the world, to understand who we
だか
are.
ら、やっぱいらないものをどんどん捨てなきゃダメだよね、人間。
Ideas that
本
will
当に
surprise
物が
you.
溢れていく。だからミニマリストの人たちって本当すごいよな。決断力がありそうだよね、やっぱり。
I literally did it on a different person. Yes. Do you feel that way? Ideas worth spreading. From TED, NPR. I'm the new child. Do you remember today at school? Step into
to an empty classroom, maybe a pastel backdrop set up with blazing bright lights.
Okay, next up.
And the photographer,
Here, please.
who is in the middle of taking dozens, if not hundreds, of kids' photos,
All right, shoulders back.
starts posing like a doll.
Chin,
Turn your body,
shake back,
adjust your shoulder,
side.
sit up straight,
Okay, now
look
look
at the camera. Before you know it, a moment which feels so incredibly forced, awkward, and unnatural
Smile.
is captured for all time. And then you go back to class, never wanting to have your photo taken ever again.
To many people, getting their photos taken is very traumatizing.
This is David's side.
When you bring up a camera to someone, people just shrink. Their body just reacts immediately without them commanding it.
David is the guy on the other side of the camera. He is a portrait photographer.
And I think a lot of people, as young children who didn't want to be photographed, were put through that. I don't think many people realize that we hold that sort of grudge, whatever it is. I think a lot of people hold that in their bodies, and it shows up in front of the camera. And when we realize that it shapes how we act, it shapes how we show up.
David sees this all the time with clients. Confident, interesting people with incredible careers and hobbies don't know how to feel natural in front of the camera. So David has made it his mission to reject the culture of awkward, scripted poses.
I'm tired of being stuck in the same poses over
And instead found a way to help people feel more confident, more themselves.
Well, my name is David Tom, professional photographer, and I'll show you how to go from that to this.
He has millions of followers on TikTok and Instagram, where he dishes out practical and thoughtful advice from how to pose in direct sunlight at the beach without getting washed out, to how to take a photo of two friends who are of very different heights,
When you see a stranger photographing something,
to how to take pictures in public without being that obnoxious person taking up the whole side.
speaking of attention, so how do we take this want of looking good in photos and believe ourselves that we're ads to perceive ourselves? And now it's about moving our bodies and saying, how do we find comfort in our body when we're so used to tearing it down and saying, oh, it looks terrible, it's not perfect.
How do we do that? How do we reconcile the image that we have of ourselves with the one that we show to the world? That's what today's episode is about. Self-perception. From why we want to think of ourselves as good people to definitions of beauty that have been exported from the plastic surgery capital of the world. How can we make peace with who we are on the outside and inside? For David Suh, a good portrait marries those two things, inside and outside. But this kind of thinking was not obvious to David when he first went to college.
At that time, I was doing a lot of college grad photos.
David had wanted to study dance, but that didn't work out. So instead, he majored in design at UC Davis. Taking photos was a great way to make some extra money.
I was like, okay, I have a nice camera and I can take decent photos. Everyone's offering to do it for X amount of price. So let me just get myself some money to go to dinner a few times a week. And in the beginning, it was very cookie cutter.
David says he Googled grad school photo poses for inspiration.
Right? Like there's a sense of style to it. Maybe it's a girl graduating, she's got her hands on her hips, and then she's got her arm up in the air. Maybe it's like throwing the like calves, like that. If anything, it was a big roadblock for me. I didn't want to think about poses. The only reason I was posing people was because I knew I had to. They weren't professional models. And I'm glad I came across my mentor Sue Bryce at that time too, because Sue was the one who really taught me that we can't be put into boxes. And I think a lot of us feel comfortable when we are in boxes, we look like other people, and it's safe. but we as photographers can be in control. You can control the outcome of how photos come out for everyone and how people experience it.
And so when he realized he was responsible not just for taking composed pictures, but for making his clients feel comfortable, David drew out his list of poses.
And then people started realizing, oh yeah, David doesn't just do poses, he's really thinking about each individual.
He started having fun with his clients, moving with them, dancing with them, and kind of inventing new poses on the spot, whatever felt natural. And now he has his own egos.
Posing is a practice of being present in your body and communicating who you are through body language.
Today, when David starts working with a client, he asks them a few questions. How do you want to see yourself? How do you want to feel in these photos? How do you define feeling like yourself? Then they look at clothing options.
Let's look at pictures and silhouettes. And let's also deconstruct what some of these clothing association that's tied to these clothes. I could really just redefine this. I could wear and don this suit. I could wear this beautiful dress. And through this exercise at the end, they're realizing I am so much more than how I perceive myself.
Like they gotta have different pictures with it. There's hair, makeup, and then like what actually happens in the session. How do you get them to loosen up, feel comfortable?
The process I take
そうですね。
everyone
ち
through
ょっ
is
と画角を変えた方がいいですかね。
getting really present in the moment. Getting really present in the moment. There's many different ways to do it. There's breathing, just breathing and slowing down. Feeling the toes that you have that's contacting your shoe into the ground. If they're sitting, then I really help them feel like, what are you sitting on? And that just brings them back to the present moment and in their body. And I'm guiding her movements at that point, right? We've done our hair and makeup. She wants to explore in the way she wants to explore. And now I'm just trying to channel as much of the definition that she's following.
David gets his clients to mirror him, his movements, his facial expressions. He wants them to feel relaxed.
And I'm just moving my arm over here and they wave to me. Awesome. And the other side wave to me.
You're dancing.
It's a dance. And not only am I physically mirroring them, I'm also emotionally mirroring them. I'm doing every step of the way. Sometimes my there.
You just look like you're having such a good time. Can you tell the story about where you decided to get into a dress because your client was wearing a dress? And sort of an epiphany that you had.
Yeah. I love making things easier for people and helping them sort of unlock something new. And it's really important to be, especially as a guy, for me to feel that. If I'm going to be creating a safe space for a lot of my female students, I want to make sure I'm not operating with this some judgment and it's good playful and say, yeah, I'm going to put on this dress and have fun.
You wanna be as in the skin of the person you're talking to as possible.
Exactly. My social media followers too, a bigger demographic is women there as well. So I get a lot of questions like, David, how do you pose for your pregnancy photos? How do you pose in a mini skirt? And I remember putting on my first mini skirt and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so exposed.
Yeah.
And I realized, yeah, I definitely cannot suggest that pose I was about to do in my just baggy jeans.
Right.
So there's like a practical, like technical sense to it of like, yeah, I need to really understand, just like you said, like if you're in a tight dress, you just can't physically move your body in a certain way. And there are feelings to it that we just would never know unless we try to be physically in their shoes.
But David, do you think sometimes people have unrealistic expectations? They're gonna think, you know, if I just can prove to myself that I can look amazing in a photo, or I can show the world how hot I can be, that's gonna fix something. That's gonna solve something.
Well, of course. So that's why the reflection beginning is so important to say this isn't for anybody else but you. And I can't control all of that. We have our egos, right? We also do. I want to make sure I tell my clients this. Many clients would say this is very therapeutic, but by no means am I a therapist. I'm not here to help you through just like different mental health issues, right? If that's the thing. So yes, it's acknowledging that as well.
Are you a proponent or believer of the saying, fake it till you make it?
No, I've come to really distance myself from that saying. Especially in the world of posing. I think it's a way to reflect how I think society defines posing, like fake it, right? Like suck in your stomach because you don't want to see that. Because I grew up thinking that the one definition of hot was like Chris Evans with his six-pack abs coming out the ocean. Once we hit adulthood, the older we get, I feel like we start to um, create even more stubborn belief of who we think we are versus like, oh yeah, let's try this, let's play with this. And this session with me is almost like breaking down your Lego castle that you super glue together and really snapping your finger and saying, no, it's actually sandcastle. Let's rebuild it. Want to see a picture?
That's David the king of poses. You can see his full talk at TED.com and find his Instagram at David Photo. On the show today, self-perception. I'm Alicia Samarodi. You're listening to the TED Radio Hour.
Like I'm still in shock.
Support for NPR and the following message come from the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org. It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Manoush Zamarodi. On the show today, our self-image and why so many of us so desperately want to think of ourselves as good people. Let's say you were walking down the street and you accidentally bump against someone on the sidewalk. You didn't mean to. You didn't realize they were going to tilt that way, and then they call you a name. It makes you feel horrible. This is NYU Business School professor and psychologist Dolly Chirk. And I'm like, boy, am I a jerk? I was looking at my phone. I really should have been looking up. I guess I'm kind of a jerk. That exact situation has happened to me, and it was upsetting. And Dolly says there's a good reason why. Many of us have what psychologists call a central moral identity. We care about whether we're seen as a good person and whether we feel like good people. And the idea in that moment is that you weren't intending to do harm to someone, but you inadvertently did. Now your self-view is being threatened because something you've done that doesn't match how you see yourself showing up in the world. How do different people define good? What are some of the different definitions that you've heard? Sure. Well, some people define being good as holding a door open. Other people might define being a good person as being someone who treats everyone the same, no differences based off of gender, perhaps. Other people might define good person as someone who does no harm to others, just manages themselves and doesn't cause any problems. Someone else might define being a good person as someone who goes above and beyond, who is making things better, not just doing them harm. So when we wake up every morning, we each have this sort of self-image of who we are in the world, and generally we're trying to stick to a moral code that we set for ourselves?
Well, the way I would think about it is people do vary in how central their moral identity is to them. And so, do people wake up, as you said, thinking, how am I going to be a good person? I think some people do, but I think most of us think about how are we going to get the kids off to school and
Yes.
how am I going to get to work on time and clear traffic and what's the weather? That said, our moral identity is often guiding how we react to what we call self-check, to anything that makes us feel like we are not a good person. We may not all have the same definition, but within whatever our definition is, that moral identity is important to many of us.
Dolly Chug continues from the TED stage.
Now, if somebody challenges us, like they question us for a joke we tell, or maybe they say our workforce is homogenous or a slippery business expense, we go into red zone defensiveness. I mean, sometimes we call out all the ways in which we help people from marginalized groups, where we donate to charity, the hours we volunteer to nonprofits. We work to protect that good person identity. It's important for many of us. So what if I told you that our attachment to being good people is getting in the way of us being better people? What if I told you that our definition of good person is so narrow, it's scientifically impossible to meet?
So that is a big statement that it is
いやー、結構
impossible
疲れ
to
る
meet
な。
our own definition of what a good person is. And you have done studies on this. Walk us through your
結構
research.
疲れ
What
ま
have
す
you
ね。
found
そうですの。
when it comes to trying to be the good person that we think we are?
Yeah. So we looked at things like why do we sometimes not even notice a decision we are about to make has ethical implications? Or why are we so able to overlook an ethical failure in ourselves that we would jump all over
ちょっと
if it
休
was
憩
so?
中です。
Or if I do something sketchy earlier in the day, do I kind of compensate later in the day and do something particularly pro-social? But other times I do something sketchy earlier in the day and I get sketchier as the day goes on. So in other words, like why do these spirals sometimes go downward and sometimes go upward? So there is lots of literature
そ
by
れが
a
さ、
number
な
of
んかやっぱ
extraordinary
若干
scholars.
遠くから、遠目から見てさ、
And we were able to
自分の頭頂部とかさ、結構改めて見るとさ、なんかやっぱ全然気になるほど、別に AGA じゃねえんじゃねえかって俺思っちゃうんだけど。
the idea that sometimes we behave ethically and sometimes we don't.
絶対AGA クリニックのやつ、薬を売りつけるためになんか、大げさに言ってると思うんだよね。絶対。まあ、商売だからさ、あれだからいいんだけど。そうだよね。俺もなんかさ、なんかでも言うほどなんだよなって思ってて、なんかだから自分で見えない部分があるから、そこのこと言ってんのかなと思って、なんかいろいろな角度から今見てみたけど、別になんか普通だよね。むしろなんか、普通にふさふさだなって自分で思っちゃったんだけど。まあでも、薬飲まないよりは、なんか飲んでいた方が、まあ、予防にはなるのかな、みたいな、なんかそういう前向きには考えてはいますけど、なんかちょっと、高いよなって薬の、なんか AGA クリニックの薬。個人輸入でどうやって買ってんの教えてよ。わかんないんだけど。買い方がわかんない。
And so now I'm going to spiral more towards something that will bring me back up to that positive self view. When I get in, this security guard looked like they'd had a tough night. I'm going to go grab them a cup of coffee when I get my home. To sort of make up for it. Yeah, our brain is a gold medal gymnast when it comes to the gymnastics necessary to make our
服をさ、しまう棚とかタンスとかラックとか俺持ってないからさ、どうしようかなって感じなんだよね。そう、服の収納を買うと部屋が狭くなるから。難しいよね。部屋の掃除めんどくせえっていうか難しいね。
And instead, set a higher standard and be the goodish person. Goodish person absolutely still makes mistakes. As a goodish person, in fact, I become better at noticing my own mistakes. I don't wait for people to point them out. I practice finding them. And as a result, sure, sometimes it can be embarrassing, it can be uncomfortable. We put ourselves in a vulnerable place. But through all that vulnerability, just like in everything else we tried to ever get better at, we see progress, we see growth, we allow ourselves to get better. Being a goodish person.
まあね、こうやって掃除してて思うんだけど、男マジ脱毛した方がいいね。髭以外。体毛なんか多分、すね毛みたいのとか、なんか、髪の毛じゃないであろう毛みたいのが、ちょろちょろ、さ、短いのがさ、落ちてんのさ、なんか、やっぱ不愉快っていうかさ、汚いよね。やっぱ、体毛脱毛した方がいいよ。男。掃除の、なんつうの、頻度が減る。絶対。毛はね、本当にね、なくした方がいい。
And he didn't realize he had done that. When I heard it, I immediately, oh my gosh, that is not how I would So I did any self-destructive person would do is I went back to my lab and I just ranted. And finally, my office mate at the time said, why don't you tell him? It's like, I literally laughed in her face. What? No, I'm not going to tell him what I just said. I don't even know him. No, I do know him, and I think he wants to know. Okay, I will go walk by his office in case he happens to be there. And sure enough, I walked by his office. I kind of poked my head in, and I was like, well, I got someone earlier today. I don't know. It just made me uncomfortable. This is the moment where I expected him to be like, well, thanks for coming by. I got to get back to work. And instead he said, hey, just wait a minute. Let me go grab another chair so you can sit down. And he ran down the hall, got a chair, and brought it into his tiny little cubicle office thing. And he said, please sit down. I really want to understand this. Can you tell me more about what you heard me say? It's now one of my closest friends. So that's a great example of what we've called being an ethical learner. They're goodish. They're trying to get better. If someone was confronted in that moment, a fixed mindset or a good person response often starts with, that's not what I meant, or I'm sorry you heard it that way, or what I really meant was. Every statement I just made was some form of trying to protect oneself. In a growth mindset, the response would be something like, wow, I didn't know that. Please tell me more.
There are some who might say, well, this has been taken too far.
Yeah.
that there's a generation of people who act as the morality police, that you can't have a meeting without there being a ton of people wanting to show off how good they are and how thoughtful they are about their fellow colleagues, when really, based on what you just taught us, a lot of it is about their own self-image.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some truth to that, right? I mean, what you're picking up on is sometimes this virtue signaling is less about being better and it's more about feeling better. And it's less about looking at ourselves and it's more about looking at others. And I would also say that what that individual is shortchanging themselves on in that moment is one of the greatest joys of being a human being, which is learning. Learning is thrilling. It's uncomfortable. It's exciting. It's painful. It's pride inducing. It is one of the things that is most gratifying. You know, the next time you encounter that situation, when you feel a little more in the know, that feels really good.
That was NYU business school professor and psychologist Dolly Should. Her most recent book is called A More Just Future. You can see her full talk at TED.com. On the show today, how we see ourselves and why we so often want to change the way we look. Women have been pressured to keep up with evolving beauty standards for millennia. But we're going to focus on the past decade, where the latest ideas of what women should look like are coming. South Korea.
Have y'all heard about that Korean skincare routine that everyone's been doing? This is so much better than everything in the US. I've been using Korean skincare for years.
So the notion of having a skincare routine that is multi-step, that is really rooted in Korean culture, skincare culture.
This is journalist Elise Hugh.
The idea of having glass skin or dewy skin,
Really cleanses my skin and makes it feel so good.
having such a beautiful canvas that you don't need to wear much makeup and you can kind of do the no makeup look.
My pores are like basically invisible, no acne. It's amazing.
That ideal is also from Korean culture. So there's a lot that we're sort of used to and normalized as just skincare these days that is tied to stuff that Korea's been doing for decades.
Through TikTok and other social media, Korean beauty trends have gone global. They've also created a massive industry.
Yeah, South Korea is exporting more cosmetics than they export smartphones, sending out sheet masks, foot peels. They're also keen on all the wands and the injectables that are getting used as med spas across the world.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of people also travel to South Korea for cosmetic procedures.
I'm flying 15 and a half hours to Seoul, South Korea for my surgery done.
So it costs me less to fly to Seoul, stay at a hotel, and get all of my beauty treatments done than it does for just the treatments in the US.
And now South Korea has the world's highest concentration of cosmetic surgeons.
So there's all sorts of cosmetic surgeries like getting your jaw broken to be shaped.
You know, with the reduction of the cheekbones and jawlines, we had a facial reduction, also known as a lip lift. I had double eyelid surgery in Korea about 3 months ago.
Or nose jobs or breast augmentation.
So I had under eye fat repositioning, which is when they take the under eye fat pad and it is repositioned so you don't look so tired.
Elise first experienced the world of K-beauty in 2015 when she moved to Seoul to report for NPR. After many years of living there, she ended up writing a book called Flawless: Lessons in Looks and Culture from the K-beauty Capital, in which she makes one central point,
that the future has kind of already arrived in Seoul, and what Korea presents is kind of a canary in the coal mine for where we're going to be in terms of appearance and how much appearances matter. Seoul is all about optimizing your face and your body.
Here's Elise Hugh on the TED stage.
If you want your skull reshaped, any part of your body lifted or enhanced, have at it. It's the cosmetic surgery capital of the world. No other place comes close. Having a slimmer jawline is so desirable that a Seoul plastic surgery clinic
once displayed the human bones of jaws it had shaved down in a glass vase in its lobby. This has since been removed. But this kind of body augmentation work isn't just accepted, it is expected because insole look matters so much for your professional and personal advancement. Headshots are required on resumes. Hiring officers make character judgments based on your taste. You were often bullied if you were bald or gay. Trying to look better is framed as a route to economic security and a matter of personal responsibility. But Korea just shows us a more concentrated and extreme example of the pretty privilege that exists everywhere. Look at fat phobia in the United States, helping drive off the charts off-label use of Ozempic, not for diabetes, but for weight loss. It makes sense when we are so rewarded for thinness and stigmatized for fatness. And all I'm saying is we should reckon with this. Because the more narrow our idea of beauty is, the wider the pool of ugly becomes.
In a minute, more with Elise Hu on how ideas of beauty are becoming subhuman thanks to AI, and how all this has affected the way she parents her 3 daughters. On the show today, our self-image. I'm Manoush Zamarodi, and you're listening to the TED Radio Hour from NPR. We'll be right back. It's the TED Radio Hour from NPR. I'm Manoush Zamarodi. Today on the show, our self-image. We were just talking to Elise Hu, the author of Flawless, which tracks the history of South Korea's domination of the global beauty industry. So, Elise, you focus on South Korea, but I mean, many cultures are obsessed with looks. I am half Iranian. I'm just thinking of all the Persian women I've known who have gotten those jobs. What is so different about South Korea? Is there a new level of pressure or societal expectation there?
We have to remember that South Korea is an extremely homogeneous society. 97% of the people in Korea are Korean. They're ethnically Korean, which is so different than the US. And what I came to understand after my time living there was that a Korean woman who gets cosmetic surgery in order to fit in, she's not looking good or acceptable just for herself. This is a way of showing respect to others in her community or in her family. Because so many young girls who are getting plastic surgery, that double eyelid surgery that is so common, they're getting it at the behest of their mothers or their grandmothers. Family members are insisting that they do this in order to fit in. And as the rest of the world becomes as visual and as appearance focused as Korea was 10 years ago, that having good looks is framed as a matter of personal responsibility. Kind of like, oh, if you can fix this about yourself, then why wouldn't you do it?
You were there exactly 10 years ago, and now here we are, a decade later. And are you seeing echoes of that in your own life here in the United States? You have 3 daughters, you live in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
What are you seeing that strikes you as echoing your time in Korea?
So I'm really glad that I spent so much time thinking about this because it is helpful in parenting. Now I have a tween. I have a 12-year-old. I have a 9-year-old, and 9-year-olds are getting really into skincare these days. You have the Sephora tweens, and then my youngest, who was born there, is now 7. And so I see it every day. I see that I have my oldest has said to me sometimes, like, oh, my face looks bad. I don't want to go to school today. And we all had that too, or versions of that, I think, in middle school and high school. And so what Korea showed me was just how much damage that appearance bias can do.
You're saying it's a cultural, societal expectation. So I wonder, did you ever ask a Korean woman, like, what do you think? Do you want to do this, or is that kind of moot?
A lot of Korean women that I interviewed, and I interviewed hundreds from the ages of 7 to 73, and a lot of them said they wanted to look different, right? They actually had a desire to not wear skirts to school every day, or not start wearing makeup as young as they started to wear makeup. but it was so frowned upon by their individual families, by their parents, who we're all taught to respect and have reverence for, that they really felt as though there wasn't a choice, right? Like, so many of our decisions, whether it's to get Botox or whether to dye our hair, it's like situated as a choice. But is it a matter of personal choice when everybody else in the group is choosing to get this? And my point is that all of us become collateral damage when we internalize ideas that fitness is health, fat people can't be happy, or that you're less lovable if you don't participate in this particular beauty culture.
Yeah, and this one aspect that we talked about is just how vast this beauty culture has become because of social media and the digital world that is very much changing how people think that they should look in the room.
Well, one thing that we did talk about too is kind of AI, right? And how much our groceries these days are AI. And what I think we need to really watch for and remember is that internet tends towards sameness and a certain kind of smoothness or flatness. And I worry that our differences get flattened out and then it's only more and more marginalized. Even these states off the face of the body, we learn it so young. An estimated 80% of 13-year-old girls in America have already used filters or some kind of editing to alter their appearance online. And these days, the filters are hyper realistic because they tend to be AI generated. They come with a suite of characteristics teaching us how to look, things like arched eyebrows or higher cheekbones or plump lips. What then happens is you see the gap between the way you look in the mirror and the way you look in these pictures, and the digital world begins to dictate real world beauty. Because if we are chasing digital beauty, well then the limit does not exist. AI dystopia as a concept is only increasingly inhuman and how bored you are. Our bodies can project to look forever. And if we don't slow down the body augmentation arms race that I saw in Seoul, then the that were available there only get farther and farther out of reach, not just for women. I don't want my daughters coming up in a world in which their looks are the most important things about them. It is incredibly marginalizing to everybody who can't fit in and exhausting for everyone who can because you are constantly having to make or pay for interventions in order to keep up.
So where do you stand now? You wrote the book, you were hopeful that we would question these things. People question them, and yet the train rolls on.
So a way to care for one another is to remember that we are all so different. Our bodies show up in such different ways, and we are not less different because we are different from one another. In fact, it makes us really collectively strong. And what we do to us is make us think, oh, there's only one way to look, and it's this particular way, and we really have to fight back against that. And so I do a lot of my interviews without makeup on. I want to make sure that that's out there because I don't want to be like glam squatted all the time. Right, I want people to know that there's all kinds of ways to look and to hear that I have worth and value, what I say has worth and value that's not linked by the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But the more we do it, not dyeing the hair, not doing the Botox, the more comfortable it becomes. So we need to lean into our humanity. The good products aren't sweet, and aren't necessarily aesthetically pleasing. Because if we go in this direction of smoothness and sameness, it's really quite a boring future.
That was journalist Elise Hu. She's the host of the TED Talks Daily podcast. Her book is called Flawless: Lessons, Looks, and Culture from the K Beauty Capital. By the way, since we spoke in 2025, South Korea has become the world's second largest exporter of cosmetic products. You can see her full talk at TED.com. We want to wrap up the show with a very scientific perspective on our self-image. We might say to someone, You really know who you are, or I always know where I stand with you. It's a compliment. But there are certain mental health conditions that can truly change someone's sense of self and be very disorienting for them and their loved ones. As science writer Anil Ananthaswamy explained on the TED stage in 2022.
About a decade ago, I met someone who had experienced a few episodes of schizophrenia. They had felt that their sense of self, of what it feels like to be them, changing somewhat. The boundaries of the body began to feel a bit nebulous. Even their psychological self felt a bit porous at times. They were experiencing what could be called an altered sense of self. Over the years, I met many such brave and insightful people who shared what it's like to live with their altered selves. And by altered, I mean different, not deficient, while acknowledging that coping with altered selves can be a struggle at times. So, speaking with them and with theologians, philosophers, neuroscientists, I came to understand that this self that each one of us takes oneself to be is not as real as it seems. Take, for instance, the question, who am I? The most likely answer you'll get or give to such a question will be in the form of a story. We tell others and indeed ourselves stories about who we are. We take our stories to be sacrosanct. We are our stories. But a condition that most of us, sadly, are familiar with, Alzheimer's disease, tells us something quite different. In order for our stories to form, to grow, something that just happens to us has to first enter short-term memory and then get incorporated into what's called long-term episodic memory. But what if the experience doesn't even enter short-term memory? In the beginning, Alzheimer's compares the formation of short-term. It compares the growth of the narrative. It's as if our stories begin stalling upon the onset of the disease. Eventually, Alzheimer's eats away at older long-term memories. So if you were to meet someone with mid-stage Alzheimer's, they will likely be able to tell you stories about who they are. But if you know their real stories, you'll be able to tell that they sometimes scramble out their narrative, that they sometimes mix up the sequence of episodes from their lives. It's as if they are recalling their own stories in ways that are not quite accurate. Realize that there is still a person experiencing that scrambled narrative. Sadly, Alzheimer's goes on to destroy one's narrative and so much more. And yet, Alzheimer's tells us that these stories that we take ourselves to be, what philosophers call the narrative self, these are spun by the brain and body. They are constructions. When the construction goes wrong, we perceive our own stories in ways that are not quite real. From the narrative self, let's talk about our body. Let's take a very basic aspect of our bodily self. This feeling we all have that we are owners of our body and body parts. If I were to ask you, does your hand belong to you? You're going to say, of course it does. What a foolish question. But not everyone would agree. Early on in my research, a neuropsychologist alerted me to a condition called xenomelia, or foreign limb syndrome. You may have heard of something called phantom limb syndrome, in which people who have had an amputation feel the presence of that limb sometimes. Xenomelia is somewhat of an opposite condition, where people feel like some part of their body, usually the extremities of their hands or legs, don't belong to them. So this neuropsychologist talked of phantom limb syndrome as animation without incarnation. So the limb is vibrant, not incarnated, but it's animated in your mind. And he talked of xenomelia as incarnation without animation. So the limb is present, healthy even, incarnate, and yet in your own mind it feels like it doesn't belong to you. People with xenomelia will sometimes take extreme measures to get rid of amputate their foreign seeming body parts. From the perspective of the self, though, xenomelia is telling us something very profound. It's telling us that something as basic as the sense of ownership of our own body parts is a construction. Let's take another aspect of our bodily self. It's called the sense of agency. So when I do something like pick up a cup, I have this implicit feeling that I am the agent of that action. I have willed that action into existence. That feeling is the sense of agency. But someone who's schizophrenia may not have that feeling always. Someone who's schizophrenia might do something and not feel like they are the agent of that action. Let me take one more example to drive home this point. Let's talk what it feels to be a body here and now. Not the feeling of being a soul, but the feeling of being a body in the present moment. Psychologists estimate that about 5% of the general population will at some point in their lives have an out-of-body experience. Let's assume all of us right now are having an in-body experience. Of being embodied is itself a construction, and that too can come apart. So what are these experiences of altered selves telling us? They are telling us that just about everything we take to be real about ourselves, real in the sense that we think we are always experiencing undeniable truths about our bodies, or that's just not the case. So when theologians and philosophers tell us that the self is an illusion, this is partly what they mean. So knowing all this, recognizing the constructed nature of it all, maybe we can hold on less tightly to our stories. Maybe we can learn to let go. But that's easier said than done, because the thing that is doing the letting go is also the thing that has to be let go of. Maybe we can just marvel at the efforts of people over millennia, from the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree to the modern philosopher and scientists who have asked themselves the question, why not? But most of all, I think we owe a debt to those amongst us who bravely bear witness to our altered selves, whether we do so voluntarily, like monks and nuns do when they meditate, or whether it's brought upon us by biology and circumstance. There is something remarkably robust about the processes that give rise to the totality of our sense of self. But there's something frighteningly fragile about them too. They can crack. And any one of us at any time in our life can have some sense of crack. And that knowledge, I believe, should make us empathetic towards those of us dealing with altered self. But I also believe that altered self should not be seen as the outcome of deficit or as the outcome of a lack of attributes considered normal. They are different ways of being. And it's the willingness of some of us to confront the uncertainty nature that is helping make sense of the self for all of us.
Today. This episode was produced by Katie Montreal and Harsha Nahata. James Television It was edited by Sana Sessionport, Rachel Faulkner White, and me. Our production staff at NPR also includes Karen McNamee and Patricia. Our executive producer is Irene Lucy. Our audio engineers were Julie Kathleen Our theme music was written by Ramsey Arablouei. Our partners at TED are Chris Anderson, Roxanne Kailash, Alejandra Salazar, and Daniela Balarata. I'm Lucy Gamalogi. Support for NPR and the Holiday Institute of the Podcast providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial upward mobility and regardless of race, gender, or geography. Hoffman.org. Hello, TED Talk listeners. I'm TED Walters. And today we're bringing you a special conversation on the attack on Iran by the United States and Israel.
I think it is plausible that in very short order, Iran will no longer have direct capacity to threaten other regimes in the region. That's very, very different from saying that Iran won't have the capacity to oppress their people on the ground. That is not something that the Americans right now have a military plan for.
I'm talking to Ian Bremmer, the president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media.
I do think that the fact that Trump now, on a number of issues, has absolutely not followed through on promises are why he is hemorrhaging support. And he's likely to become much more risk acceptant as a consequence of that, which may well play out in other military episodes in the United States.
We recorded this for our series, Ted Explains the World, on Saturday, February the 28th, 2026. Hello everyone, today is Saturday, February the 28th, 2026. This morning, after weeks of escalating threats, the United States and Israel bombed several parts of Iran, including the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's compound in Tehran. Iran responded in kind to missiles launched towards Israel and 4 Gulf Arab countries which host US military bases, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. Now, this is a fast-moving situation which feels extraordinarily tenuous, so we turn immediately to Eurasia Group's founder Ian Bremmer to help us make sense of what is happening now and what is to come. So, Ian, as I mentioned, the threats have been stacking up for weeks now, so this escalation isn't exactly a surprise, but tell us why Trump is doing this now.
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, there is a level of confidence that Trump has, both on the back of his success in Venezuela, having removed Nicolas Maduro, not assassinating him, actually bringing him to justice. There were a lot of Venezuelans and Cubans were killed in the operation. No American for it, so I know who well. The Americans find it popular. Most of the Latin American countries find it popular, and he's like, well, I can do this in other places too. So part of it is that. Part of it is that he's had experience with Iran before, military experience. After withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear deal, the JCPOA, in his first term, he's put the Iranians on notice on a couple of occasions, and when he is engaged in military strikes against Iran, the Iranians have not been able or willing to hit him back. And so he doesn't feel like there's a deterrent capability here. So he's not taking a particularly big risk. Finally, he did engage in negotiations, but his demands were much greater than the Iranians were willing to engage. And that's been clear for months now, frankly. But he did want to ensure that there was adequate military capabilities in the region, both in terms of the strikes that the Americans were going to engage in, that we're now seeing the beginning of, but also in terms of America's ability to help defend Israel and its own bases and its allies across the region. The final components of that only got into place days ago, and then this was the first window of opportunity. After that, when the Americans and Israelis had a clean shot at the Supreme Leader and the top military leadership, and they gave the order. So that's what precipitated all of this. There's a broader question about how do we feel about the United States exercising unilateral military power all over the world, engaging in a policy of regime change, assassinating political leaders. What does that mean going forward for the U.S.? What does it mean for other countries around the world? But in terms of what led to this series of strikes, this certainly did not surprise us. I don't think it was a big surprise to the markets. The scale of the military strikes were greater than were generally anticipated, but nobody credible following this believed that the negotiations were heading for breakthrough, nor did they believe that this was a taco moment, that Trump was going to chicken out. They did feel, and we did feel, that he was going to make good, as it were, on his threats, as were the Israelis, and they've been coordinating on this very closely for a couple of months.
So, as you know, Trump just announced a few minutes ago on Truth Social that Khamenei is dead. Is like, what happens now? That feels huge.
I think it is a big deal, and I mean there are a few things to say about it. The first is that let us remember that this is an incredibly brutal regime, and that Khamenei has not only been personally responsible for the brutality of the regime, but also has been a hardliner in terms of refusing effective negotiations with the Americans over the past months. I mean, certainly many thousands of Iranian civilians and believed tens of thousands of Iranian civilians were killed under the order of Khamenei in January when they were demonstrating. And most of these were unarmed and not posing a direct security threat to the troops that they were facing off against. That is, frankly, we haven't seen that kind of short-term brutality in the region anywhere. You have to look to Sudan, you have to look to Rwanda before you saw that kind of killing. You're talking about the sort of deaths over the course of a couple of weeks that you saw in Gaza over an entire year of fighting. So that's really an extraordinary brutality, and the consequence. There aren't a lot of people that are going to shed a tear over the death of Khamenei. Having said that, he is not the regime. He's 86 years old. They've been planning for transition for a long time. The fact that he has been killed will make him seem to be more of a martyr in the eyes, certainly, of those that support the regime inside Iran, of whom there are many, a minimum of probably 15 and 20% of the population are ardent regime supporters and will become more so on the back of this assassination. The Iranian military leadership has taken substantial strides over the 12-day war last year, and they reconstituted themselves quite quickly. It didn't affect their ability and willingness to repress internally. It does appear that a number of other military leaders may well be dead. Probably not the president, but others, because it's not a very important in the eyes of the Iranian people or driving power. The head of the IRGC may well be the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the Israeli as well as other top advisors to the supreme leader on the military side. But it's very far to go from that to it's the end of the regime. Remember, when Trump launched these strikes with the Israelis, he said we're attacking all of the military installations, and they've certainly done that. They're attacking all the ballistic missile installations that they can find, that they can get to. They're certainly doing that. But he also said this is meant to be an operation of regime change. He said now that we're taking over leadership, it is your once-in-a-generation opportunity, the Iranian people, to take your government. But taking the government requires overthrowing those members of the IRGC, the military, the Basij, the paramilitary groups, the police officers on the streets, and others that have been very willing and capable of using lethal force against the Iranian civilians. And there's no reason to believe that that's about to change. It might, we can hope that it's about to change. There's no reason yet. There's no evidence that makes us believe that. And there's certainly no American boots on the ground. There are no Israeli boots on the ground. There's no coordinated opposition with leadership the way there has been in Venezuela, for example. So, I mean, on the one hand, Venezuela is fully prepared to continue to work with the same regime, having removed Maduro, and that has so far proven to be a pretty effective short-term strategy. But in Iran, Trump isn't prepared to work with the existing regime, understandably in many ways. But it's not clear how we get from that to extraordinary thing for Iran and for the entire region and for the world. But someone's got to actually make that happen. And for now, as of today, it'd be quite a stretch to say that the Iranian people have the capacity to do that.
So Reza Pahlavi, who is of course the son of the Shah, has said if he didn't come back from exile, how realistic do you think that is?
I mean, with sufficient support, policing around him, it is perhaps plausible that he could be there, he could set up camp someplace. I think it's plausible. It's not today, but it's perhaps plausible. But that requires some level of intervention, right? I mean, it's not as if you're able to right now fly in friendlies and you're going to be welcomed at the Tehran International Airport. Like that's not a thing. And again, I mean, Trump has been very careful. Everyone is talking about how Trump is a hawk and Trump is a hardliner and he's willing to use military force. And clearly, there are lots of countries that have been on the wrong side of American bombs and missiles over the last year, just as they have in the Biden administration, as they have in previous administrations. But Trump does not want American troops being killed. He doesn't want forever wars. Remember, he brought the war in Afghanistan after some 20 years to an end. Biden concluded it, but it was Trump that took a deal with the Taliban. And in many ways, it was one-sided because he just wanted the American troops out. And so Trump is going to continue to be extremely reluctant to commit any American forces on the ground. And absent that, we are pretty far, at least, again, as of today, from a place that you would say, I predict that this regime is over and the Shah can come back and that the Iranians can have democratic elections and they can actually put in place a regime that would represent them. We're very far from that. Now, there's still going to be a lot of military attacks, and the Americans expect this to go on probably for a matter of several days to a little over a week in terms of destroying all of Iran's naval capabilities, extinguishing their UAV, the unarmed aerial vehicles, and their missile capabilities. It is possible that they've already fired off a lot of what they still have. But even if they haven't, within a week that capacity will be done. And so, I think it is plausible that in very short order, Iran will no longer have direct capacity to threaten other regimes in the region. They may have asymmetric capabilities through proxies. They could certainly fund terrorist activities, that sort of thing. They could engage in espionage.
Yeah.
But the conventional military activities, we are nearing the end of Iran's capacity to project power. And that's a big deal. And that's very, very different, Alan, from saying that Iran won't have the capacity to repress their people on the ground. That is not something that the Americans right now have a military plan for. And it is right now there's no reason to believe there's no evidence that would show that the Iranian regime is going to be capable of continuing to repress that.
I have so many follow-up questions to that. One, I guess, is who do you see emerging then as a leader, or is it just too early to say given the chaos that is happening on the ground in Iran? And I guess the other question is, what's the plan for tomorrow? Or what's the plan after the strikes start for the Iranian people? Like, does Trump care about that? Or like, it just seems like this is all happening and there is actually no plan for the people on the ground.
So, two different questions. As of right now, your expectation would be that the IRGC will still be in charge. A number of their top leaders will be killed. There will be new leaders that will come and replace them. We see that with Hezbollah, with complete decapitation by Israel over the last year, the pager attacks and all of that.
Yeah, 終わりがねえ。
And they are nowhere near as capable as they used to be.
終わりがねえ
They
から
don't
疲
pose
れ
a
る。
significant threat to Israel today, but they still have a lot of capacity to govern on the ground. in southern Lebanon, and the Lebanese
それ
government
リアルに
has
腹減っ
been
たし。
incapable slash unwilling to disarm them, which is why the ceasefire has been hard to maintain. So that's what you would expect to see right now. Now that recognizes that it's going to be very hard for them to communicate with each other for the near term. It might be hard for them to actually have orders that are given in a centralized way that then followed out across the country. But still, for now, that's what we're looking at. And that's kind of the way the country has been run for the past years. So this is not a regime that is new to figuring out how to effectively repress its people domestically. And so
Do you see, and sorry to interrupt you, but do you see, and so given that state, so you don't see the IRGC actually kind of falling apart, you think that that will kind of they'll maintain their power, they're not organized, obviously there's a total disarray happening in the country, but the IRGC will actually stick together as a unit and will continue to run the country. Is it too early to imagine that you might see kind of democratic leaders emerging from within like the organization on the ground in Iran? I know that many leaders have been put into prison. Do you think they would get out? Like, what do you see?
All of this is too soon. I hope I am wrong. It is too early for me to be saying the IRGC is going to be in charge of this country in 3 months' time. It is too early to say that. I am responding to your question saying right now, who do I expect in charge? That's right now. That is less than 24 hours after these strikes have begun. It is still the IRGC. There are many things that could change over time. And there's very little information on the ground. But the key point here is that unlike in Venezuela, where the Americans had active, ongoing engagement with senior leaders that they were prepared to work with after taking Maduro out, they do not have that in Iran. They have tried. They have gotten some support from some IRGC members who have given them information and intelligence on the whereabouts of the supreme leader and other senior leaders in Iran. That has been helpful in getting them the success that they have just seen in these strikes. So it's not like they haven't engaged in intelligence collection. What they don't have is a group inside the government that they're prepared to work with. And the opposition at this point is very fragmented, doesn't really exist on the ground in an organized way at all, even though most people oppose the regime. So then your other question, what does Trump do? What does this mean? Well, Trump has a series of goals. And think about the way he's presented them. He wants this to be a big win. One goal is the disruption of Iran's nuclear capabilities. He did a fair amount of that last year. He said they were obliterated. Some of them were, but not all of them. As quickly as they were without oversight from the international agencies. So there's that. The ballistic missiles, the Iranians refused to even negotiate on. A lot of those have now been blown up, and those that haven't, a lot of them have been launched against Israel, but also against Gulf states. Yes, they do host American military bases, but most of the strikes that we've seen so far have actually been against civilian targets in those countries, like in Dubai, like in Riyadh, which does not actually host any American bases itself. Those bases are far outside. And so the ballistic missiles are no longer the threat that they used to be. So you already have two of the three goals that Trump announced in his decision to go ahead that Trump can say, I've already achieved, and I will have achieved by the time these military operations have concluded, I will have achieved those goals. Now, the third goal, which is regime change, he's given himself an out. He said, okay, I've done all of these strikes, and right now it's too dangerous because I'm still going to hit, and Israel is still going to hit all these military leadership targets. But once we're done, Iranians are going to take it over. And if they don't, then they'll say, well, I did everything I could. I gave them the opportunity. They didn't do it. You want to say that? He doesn't want to say that. But he's not going to take responsibility for this himself and the director was shooting himself. He already said in the initial hours of the operation that the actors that will engage in changing the regime will be the Iranian people. He has no control over the Iranian people. He has no influence over the Iranian people. A lot of the Iranian people don't particularly trust him. He said he was going to rescue the Iranian people, and tens of thousands of Iranians died after he said that he was going to rescue them. And it was, over a month later before he took military action. So, I mean, I think that if you're an Iranian citizen today, you're feeling pretty squeezed. You're not necessarily feeling like there are great opportunities in front of you in any circumstance. And it's going to be very dangerous what you decide to do going forward. And my hope is that this regime collapses. There's a minimum of violence. I think that's everyone. Whether you supported the U.S. attacks or you didn't, everyone hopes the Iranian people have a government that actually respects and reflects their values, their rights, their aspirations. Are very far from that. And the United States may have facilitated that to a degree, but they certainly are not causing it. And again, we're very far from that.
Okay. There is a very long way to go. I am curious, and this is probably a really stupid question, so you're welcome, but why have they gone by Riyadh? Like, why are they bombing other Arab states, especially without the kind of the US base? Like, I get that, but we're hearing about the Dubai airport being hit. Like, why would they?
Just now, the Dubai airport looks like it was hit, and I mean, clearly,
チャダロは別に来なくてもいい。
into the Gulf states, but I would have expected, as we saw after the 12-day war, the attacks would have been against American bases there, as we saw in Qatar. And maybe they fail, maybe they get knocked down, maybe in the
来た
process
ところ
they
で
knock down those Iranian weapons or the
一瞬
missile
一瞬で
ends up hitting
どうでもいいっていうか、 あまり興味がないというか。チャダロはどうでもよし。どうすっかね。
Likely to be shot down, and you want to show that you can do something, that you're not going to just sit
Something.
that
is to make you right among countries. I don't believe. 今年の夏これ着るかな。これ似合わなそうだな、俺な。でも一応もっと着そうだな。着るかも、これ。もしかして。 これは絶対に大変欠かせない。ユニフォームですからね。あ、ようやく見つかった。君を探していたんだよ。君はどこにいたの今まで。一回選択したんだっけ？忘れちゃった。君を探していたよ。こいつは封印だな。封印。封印。この中でコメントとかできる人いるのかわかんないんですけど、白の T シャツってさ、どこまで着る？どこまで着て捨てる？どのぐらいが捨て時？それとも捨てない？永久に着る？白 T の寿命を教えてください。捨てない。漂白する。漂白すると綺麗になる。
and supporters around the world, whether it's global South countries that really oppose the United States, or it's the Russians who have been working with Iran closely to get more support for drones to help them fight against.
だってもう結構黄ばんでるんだよね。真っ白じゃなくなっても着る。悩ましいところなんだが。
The Americans and the Israelis establishing military dominance against Iran and in the region. And that's wildly different than the first year of Trump's second administration, when he focused primarily on tariffs and economic tools, and where many countries around the world were very capable of hitting back and not just capitulating and actively negotiating, but also using their own coercive tools and mechanisms and getting to a place that they felt was better than what they were initially being demanded. That is not the case militarily, either in Venezuela or in Iran, or I suspect in Cuba going forward. And where else might President Trump decide that he really likes taking unilateral military action that no one is willing or capable to respond against?
How does that play though with MAGA? how does that play with people who really didn't want America to get involved? Is the fact that he manages to make this kind of short, sharp, kind of invasions and there's no boots on the ground, is that kind of the way that Trump skirts around that? Because it feels like in the last presidential campaign, he actually campaigned on not starting wars, and instead that really has not been the case, although of course the definition of war is a little different if there aren't actually soldiers and troops on the ground.
Right. I mean, if no American soldiers are getting killed, then it's a much easier proposition for him to square with his MAGA supporters. And in Venezuela, knock on wood, no American servicemen and women have been killed. There were a few injuries, but no one was killed. And so far, again, early hours, no Americans have been killed. But certainly Trump is prepared for Americans to be killed, combatants and quite plausibly non-combatants on the back of this. And large numbers of Americans killed because of a war of choice in Iran will be unpopular with significant numbers of Trump's MAGA base. There is a break in MAGA on Israel. There are a number of strong MAGA supporters, and you've seen this with Tucker Carlson in particular, but there have been others that have been out there publicly saying absolutely not. Why are we carrying so much water for Israel? Why are we providing them billions and billions of dollars in military support? Why are we engaging in military actions that are supporting what they want in their backyard? I mean, on Ukraine, the United States has stopped providing military aid. Why? Because it's far away and we think the Europeans should do it. So why are we supporting Israel? And there's a lot of MAGA supporters that don't like that. There are a lot of MAGA supporters that do. And there are a lot of MAGA donors that do. I mean, Miriam Adelson in particular, but there are many, and that many that go to Mar-a-Lago all the time, just as there are those that support military operations in Venezuela and Cuba among the Miami exile community. But it is not uniquely popular. And here there's we should address the broader issue, which is because you asked me, how is Trump dealing with the fact that he made these promises, he campaigned on this stuff, and there were so many people pro-MAGA that were saying that Kamala Harris was going to be the war candidate, but Trump wouldn't. Trump's not a hawk. And Charlie Kirk, he was assassinated. Before that, he was extremely opposed to the idea of attacking Iran, and is on record in doing so. And I'm sure that there are many opponents to Trump, including some in MAGA, that are going to be using that. Now, Trump has made good on a number of his promises. He promised that he was going to use tariffs and he was going to work to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and force other countries to spend money in the U.S. And he's cut a bunch of deals with promises from the Japanese and the South Koreans and the UK and the Europeans and the Saudis and others to start spending a lot more money in the U.S. So whether you like the policy or not, whether you think tariffs are a good idea or not, and certainly there's an affordability problem on the back of it, he's made good on that. He promised he was going to close the border, and he has done a lot of work in closing the border. He promised he was going to fight fentanyl. He's done a lot of work in fighting fentanyl. The Mexicans have been very, very significant partners of the U.S. But he also promised that he was going to America first in these wars. And while there are no troops on the ground, it is now clear that unilateral American military power is being used to project outcomes that he wants, that a lot of MAGA is clearly uncomfortable with, especially in the Middle East. It's also clear that the Epstein file, where Trump said, I'm going to clean this place up, and we're going to release those files, because there's a two-tier justice system. And yet, Bill and Hillary Clinton will be brought in to testify, but not Howard Lutnick. And so he's protecting his own. And everyone sees that. And he said he was going to drain the swamp. He doesn't talk about that anymore. In fact, it turns out not only was there a lot of corruption in the U.S. Under previous administrations, but it's even more corrupt now under Trump. It's kleptocratic, benefiting him and his family directly, and many insiders in the administration with him. So I do think that the fact that Trump now, on a number of issues, has absolutely not follow through on promises that matter deeply to MAGA are why he is hemorrhaging support and why he is very likely, overwhelmingly likely, to lose the House, probably by a substantial margin in November. And that's he's running out of time. It's getting harder for him to turn that around every day. And I don't think that unilateral strikes on Iran with Israel are going to change that. I don't think the Supreme Court's ruling on IEPA is going to change that. I don't think that the Minneapolis ICE efforts are going to change that. I think that he's in more trouble over the last couple of weeks, especially as the negative things. And he's likely to become much more risk acceptant as a consequence of that, which may well play out in other military episodes internationally.
But why? I mean, why if things are going badly and your numbers are down, I understand why you become more risk acceptant, but actually leaning into doing even more reckless things feels like maybe the wrong direction to head in.
It is something he can do. It's power that he has. If he were listening to his top advisors, he would be acting very differently. I think the Venezuelan issue he would have handled very similarly. The IEPA tariffs, he was told by his Secretary of Treasury and by his U.S. trade rep, don't use this. It won't stand up. And he obviously knows better than they do because he's the president. He's the one that won. And so he went ahead and he did it. And then less than a year later, the Supreme Court, including his own nominees, vote against it. And now it's going to be harder for him. Now he's going to be more constrained. So, I think the problem is that Trump is very short term. He's very, attached to the latest shiny object. He constantly wants to make headlines. And he's incredibly undisciplined. So he does not have the temperament to engage in the strategic political revolution that would allow him to more effectively build a presidency that sits above checks and balances. I think what we're finding is increasingly he's failing on a bunch of issues. And as a consequence, you start to see whether it's justices or whether it's members of the military or whether it's Republican leaders start to take public steps against it. And that wasn't happening 3 months ago, 6 months ago, but now it is. We've seen it on a number of occasions, and I think we're going to see more of it going forward.
I think it's also true, isn't it, that some of the people who've been giving him advice, particularly on this war, some of his military advisors actually then got cast out.
Cast out, that's right.
Right. So does he really believes that he can kind of do this because he's the president, he can just do this all by himself?
Well, these are relatively junior people, most of them, because keep in mind that what Trump has hired for this time around, some of his advisors are very capable, in my estimation, like Marco Rubio and Jameson Greer. Some of them are incredibly incompetent, in my estimation, like Pete Hegseth, for example, or RFK. But they all are incredibly loyal. So unlike Trump's first year, in his first term of office, where it was a revolving door with a lot of people that then were talking, were leaking, were extremely opposed to Trump, this time around he's too different. And it's been a relatively tight ship because they all recognize that they're going to do exactly what Trump wants or else. And the only major blow up we've seen in the first year now of the administration, year plus, was Elon Musk, who came out in spectacular fashion and pushed on the Epstein files and said he was going to create a third party and all of that. Basically grabbed onto the third rail, but backed away from it. J.D. Vance facilitated a rapprochement, and now he's working with Trump again. So, really, there's been, at the top level, there's been continued alignment and willingness to go along with whatever Trump is saying among that inner circle. And that willingness to facilitate even things that fail. So, again, we've seen how many instances now where Trump has gone after, launched lawsuits on the 6 Democrats that did this video that opposed him, and that lawsuit blew up, and he failed, and because he wasn't listening to advisors. Same thing with the lawsuit against James Comey and Letitia James and Bell wasn't listening to advisors, but they are willing to do whatever he says in all of these instances, whether it's about military strikes or economic tariffs or about taking efforts to ensure that the next election is not quote unquote rigged, like the FBI investigation and the seizing of the ballot boxes in Fulton County in Georgia. All of these are unprecedented acts, but they're unprecedented acts that President Trump is ordering and that his inner circle, his direct reporting, and his cabinet are 100% supporting. Not an inch of space between Trump and those people.
All right, let's head back to the Middle East. And you mentioned earlier the idea of asymmetric warfare. So if Iran has used up its missile armory, but the reality is that no one can actually dictate what happens with asymmetric warfare. What do you think happening, for instance, with the Houthis or with the Straits of Hormuz? Is that going to get closed? Like, what do you think is going to happen? What are the ripple effects of this, I guess, in the region?
Yeah, that's the most significant market impact, and it might be the most significant vulnerability that American servicemen and women have is to the ships, both tanker traffic directly and military ships going through the Straits of Hormuz, in the Red Sea, and more broadly. And the Houthis have shown that they have a capacity to make strikes against these boats, including like off the Horn of Africa and the Indian Ocean, even more broadly. So, I mean, I do think that there is a pretty high likelihood that for at least a period of time, the Straits of Hormuz would be impassable, and that means that oil prices, which have already spiked on these strikes, and in anticipation of these strikes, with lots of oil on the market right now, and with relatively low demand for oil, those prices are going up. Natural gas, same thing. You're going to have difficulty in getting that gas to Europe, and that means that those prices are going up. Huge amount of American military capability, minesweepers, the rest. So, I mean, I don't believe that the straits will be impassable for long. I'd be surprised if it was more than a matter of inside a few days, outside a couple weeks. I'd be surprised if it went longer than that. But there'll be continuing threat to tankers, and that means that a lot of those tankers may end up having to go the long way and costing an awful lot more money.
All right, so in to wrap this up, I'm curious what you're watching most closely in the next few days and over the next few weeks.
Most closely,
さあ、このタイミングでさ、捨てようとしてた、メルカリに出品してて、ずっと売れてなくて捨てようとしてた、服がさ、今更売れたんだけど。このタイムリーに。なんで、うまくできてんねえ世の中ね。売れちゃった。いいですね。いいですね。
Early days, you want to see what's left of the Iranian regime and what kind of opposition you see internally. More broadly than that, we want to see what kind of reaction we get across the region. Do we see effective activity by the Houthis in Yemen? Do we see terrorist activity that leads to bigger strikes against civilians? Do we see a front that the Hezbollah Lebanon front open up completely with Israel deciding this is a great opportunity to just mop that up after only limited strikes over the past month? That's certainly very plausible in this environment. So lots of things to watch. But again, in an environment where it's hard to imagine major escalation. This is not going to become a regional war. This is certainly not going to become World War III. It's much more about what happens on the ground, frankly, in Iran. That is the biggest thing we're looking at. And in that regard, very similar to right after Maduro was captured, what we were watching was what was happening on the ground in Caracas and across Venezuela. There's a lot more uncertainty for Iran than there is for Venezuela, but the basic sorts of questions are actually very similar.
Ian, thank you so much for, unlike the Europeans, taking time on your Saturday to come talk about this. We are so grateful to have your wisdom, and thank you for tracking all of this. We will, I'm sure, see you again soon.
Always great to talk to you.
That was Ian Bremmer in conversation with me, Helen Walters, for a special TED Explains the World conversation, recorded on February the 28th, 2026.
If you're curious about TED's curation, find out more at TED.com/curation guidelines. And that's it for today. TED Talks Daily is part of the TED Audio Collective. This episode was produced and edited by our team: Martha Estefanos, Oliver Friedman, Brian Green, Lucy Little, and Tantika Samarnivan. This episode was mixed by Lucy Little. Additional support from Emma Tobner and Daniela Ballareza. I'm Elise Hugh. I'll be back tomorrow with a fresh idea for your feed. Thanks for listening.
MLK Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin are household names. But what about their mothers? The work that they were doing even before their children arrived, of creating, of activism, was shaping our nation. And they deserve to be celebrated for that. Anna Malika Tubbs on the mothers who influenced American history. That's next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. Subscribe or listen to TED Radio Hour wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to How to Be a Better Human. I'm your host, Chris Duffy. In today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about attention and about noticing. But despite the fact that this is a show for humans, on today's episode, we're going to be getting our advice from dogs. Today's guest, Dr. Alexandra Horowitz, is a world-renowned scientist who studies canine cognition. That is to say, her job is to figure out what dogs think and know and feel. And she is going to help us figure out how to pay attention to the world like a dog. To get us started, here's a clip from a video Alexandra made about her research with Ted Ed. And this clip is narrated by Pen Chen.
If you can smell a spritz of perfume in a small room, a dog would have no trouble smelling it in an enclosed stadium and distinguishing its ingredients to eat. And everything in the street, every passing person or car, any contents of the neighbor's trash, each type of tree, all the birds and insects in it, has a distinct odor profile telling your dog what it is, where it is, and which direction it's moving. Besides being much more powerful than ours, a dog's sense of smell can pick up things that can't even be seen at all. A whole separate olfactory system has a vulnerable nasal organ, above the roof of the mouth, detects the hormones all animals, including humans, naturally release. It lets dogs identify potential meats and distinguish between friendly and hostile acts. It alerts them to our various emotional states, and it can even tell them when someone is present. Because olfaction is more primal than other senses, bypassing the thalamus to connect directly to the brain structures involving emotion and instinct, we might even say a dog's perception is more immediate and visceral than ours. But the most amazing thing about your dog's nose is that it can traverse time. The past appears in tracks left by passers-by and by the warmth of a recently parked car, or the residue of where you've been and what you've done recently. Landmarks like fire hydrants and trees are aromatic bulletin boards carrying messages of who's been by, what they've been eating, and how they're feeling. And the future is in the breeze, alerting them to something or someone approaching long before you see them. Where we see and hear something at a single moment, a dog smells an entire story from start to finish.
We are going to have a lot more story for you, our human listeners, and for any time-traveling dog companions you've got with you, right after this big break. Don't go anywhere.
like a broken record. I do not want kids. I don't want kids. I don't want to have a kid. Don't want to have a kid. Don't want to have a kid. I'm in my 40s now. The door is almost closed. And suddenly, I'm not so sure. The story has always been no. I'm just wondering to what degree it's just a story.
Definitely just a story.
From CBC's Personally, this is Creation Myth, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Today on the podcast, we're talking to Alexandra Horowitz about what we can learn about being human, being present, and paying attention from dogs.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Horowitz. I'm the head of the Dog Foundation at Barnard College and an author.
So, Alexandra, you study dogs, and a lot of people know you for your book, Inside of a Dog. But I also am really interested because you wrote this book that I am passionate about and have recommended to so many people called On Looking, which is just about seeing the world in different ways. So can you give us the kind of 2-sentence description of what On Looking is?
Thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say. On Looking really grew out of my experience with dogs, where I was starting to see the world differently, trying to see the dog's eyes or the dog's nose as it happens. And I decided that I would do a book of walks around my neighborhood with people who have different ways to see and try to see what else there was to see in that same sort of boring set of blocks that I was very used to walking. And it was a terrific exercise for me because it was all about perspective, which is what you have to keep in mind all the time as a scientist, and especially when you're studying a non-human. But all the work I did with dogs, which was about trying to understand what dogs know and understand and experience the world, really fed back into my own life completely. So my own relationship with the dog, trying to think about her and what she needed, wanted, and thought about. But then also how I viewed other people and thought about their lives and what they knew and wanted and thought about. It really was like a perspective and empathy opening exercise. And it continues to be, right? Like it's an ongoing, it's not something like that project is done with it. That's my own done with it. Now I know.
Now I know it. So this is something that I think anyone who has a pet, but especially a dog, can relate to, which is that before you explored with your pet, you did not stop in the same places. You did not notice the same details. And all of a sudden, your dog being so fascinated by that particular corner, by that particular tree stump, by the fire hydrant on this stretch, it makes you pay attention to it in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. I mean, from the very first moment you leave your house, I live in a city, but wherever you live, and head out in your morning, you're going to work or you're exercising, typically we just sort of stop looking. We're no longer looking. If there's something wildly different, we might notice it. We might notice it, right? And especially in New York, where you're kind of inured to the presence of things on the street, even people, we're constitutionally sort of not supposed to look in a way. And so, yeah, we ignore everything around us. And even though I can tell you that I've passed buildings or vehicles or people or trees on my route, I know that more conceptually than perceptually, right? Like I didn't. So having to go a dog's pace allows you to see a lot of things every time you stop and stare up at the building while your dog's nose is staring down at the sidewalk. There's something there you haven't seen before. Is it ghost writing? Is it funny brickwork? Is it a bird who's perched there or whatever? You just notice things. And then as soon as you notice one thing, it leads to another thing to notice. And so it's contagious. And I really am thankful to my dogs for showing me that.
I think that also one of the reasons why people who maybe aren't necessarily science people or don't think of themselves as science people, why people are so drawn to your research and wanting to understand it is because there's this deep curiosity people feel that is tied to that noticing with that dog of what is my dog actually experiencing? What is my dog thinking? What when they get excited about that leaf, why? What is it that is making that happen? And you spent a lot of your career trying to answer those questions in a really rigorous way.
those why questions, right? Because I also was a person who lived with a dog, and I also had those exact questions. And when I was a couple of years into studying dogs, which I didn't start doing because I was interested in dogs for the sake of dogs, actually, it was because they were sort of a good model for studying this idea of theory of mind in non-human others during play. Boom, boring. But it turned out that got me studying dogs. And I saw that the things I learned from my own research and then from other people's research as more people started doing this, I translated immediately to living how I thought about living with her and started to answer questions about, what she was doing. And that got me then listening to other people's questions and also the ways they talk to dogs, right? And the things they make assumptions about with dogs. And so the very fact of how we live with dogs becomes its own kind of empirical subject. So yeah, it's been very fertile.
For people who aren't aware of what it means, let's talk a little bit about that theory of mind. What is that? What is that?
Oh, the theory of mind is this notion that a psychological notion of ability we all develop as children to think about other people's perspectives, essentially. To know that as I talk to Chris Stuffy, you, Chris, know, want, think about things that are different than what I know, want, or think about. There might be similarities, but you have your own knowledge set. And it's important. Children are sort of wildly egocentric in some sense, So you have a very young child, right? If you say they can't have a cookie that's in front of them on the table, they will, well, maybe not take that cookie, right? But at about 3 years old or so, if you leave the room, they have a great insight. You no longer know whether they're taking the cookie or not.
Yeah.
Because your knowledge state is different than their knowledge state. And this leads to deception. It also leads to like a lot of interesting higher cognitive abilities. And it's a really open question whether non-human animals have this ability. Think about other animals' minds in the way that we do.
One of your studies, which I always find so fascinating, and I know it's like it prompts the most outraged debate, not because they're offended by the study, but because it challenges something that they believe themselves about their dogs. When I tell people about it, is you did quite, in my opinion, very well designed study to look at whether dogs display guilt. Whether when you say my dog is looking guilty because he knows that he wasn't supposed to eat that on the table and he jumped up and ate it, whether that is in fact a dog displaying guilt. Tell us about what you found in that study.
I got very interested in these sort of anthropomorphisms that we make of dogs, where we attribute to them what we know are human qualities. And dogs have this guilty look, right? And it's become a kind of internet phenomenon, frankly. Dog shaming, sort of like a sign around a dog's neck saying, I know I ate the couch pillow, and I'm so sorry, or something. And they have, sort of hangdog look, right? Which is maybe their ears back and their head aside, or their tail is low and wagging ferociously. And people assume when the dog gives them that look that they've done something wrong, in quotes, and that they know they did something wrong, so they feel guilty about it. And I thought, well, I don't know that. And, as a scientist, I could set up a really simple experiment to just test what prompts that look. Is it having done something wrong and then maybe feeling guilty about it because they know it's wrong? Or is it something else? And it turned out it was something else. It was not whether they did something wrong. It was, in this case, it was eating a bit of food that was forbidden for them. It was whether the owner thought they had eaten the food. When the owners thought they had eaten the food and were kind of coming in to scold them, the dogs give the most guilty look.
And that was even if they had not eaten the food, so they had nothing to feel guilty about. They would still do the look.
Yes, that's right. But if they ate the food and the owner thought that they hadn't, they didn't give as much look at all, right? So it wasn't their sort of internal sense of Jewish guilt that made them give this look. It was their response to us. And they're very good at reading our behavior even before we sort of know we're behaving, for them to read. And they put on this basically appeasing, or we call it submissive, look, which is designed to look pretty cute and hopefully to avoid the punishment that it looks like is coming. So it's not to say dogs can't feel guilt. It's, you know, as you rightly expressed it, it's more about whether that look is evidence of them feeling guilt. And it really isn't.
This is one of the ways in which I think your research, for me, informs how I think about being a human, even aside from the whole dog part of it, which is that we can create a narrative. And even more than create the narrative, we can prompt that narrative into existence and believe that it is outside of us, when in fact it is entirely coming from us, right? Like I'm like, oh, that dog feels so guilty. He's looking at me guilty. And in fact, it's like, the dog is thinking and thinking, I better look guilty because I'm getting the energy from Chris that says, you better look guilty. And I wouldn't even know that I'm making that happen.
I think with the dogs, I've been looking at it more carefully because I'm sympathizing with the dogs, but it's an interpersonal dynamic for sure, right? Imagine bringing just anger, resentment, or stress into any dynamic with somebody. It's not like you aren't wearing it all over yourself and like seeping it out with everything you say and how you present yourself and how you react to things. We are, right? Even when we think we're being subtle. And actually we're pretty good at picking up on that as humans. It interesting to me that we don't pick up as well on what the dogs are actually doing, right? We sort of put emotions and thoughts and feelings onto them without looking at them often.
We're doing this series on the podcast in January that's about how to have more laughter and humor in your life. And for me, one of the big pieces that I think of when I think of how to laugh more in your life is to start with noticing things. Because laughter, I think, is magical because it forces us to be present. You like, when you are laughing, especially when you're laughing with someone else, you are both locked into that. And I think that your book on looking, but also your research with dogs and the way you talk about it, it is a really interesting way of getting people to be present, to be in the moment. And I also think there is this is a place where there is a clear one-to-one, which is any dog owner can tell you that they have laughed really hard at something that their dog did, or at something that they experienced with their dog, because it's really easy to be present with an animal.
I completely agree with that. And I also agree with this idea that like the humor is in the details, right? There is a ton of pleasure for me in noticing anything. Just the delight of noticing it, which isn't inherently funny, right? But just it's almost like, oh, like who knew, right? I'd never seen that, I've never smelled that, or like what I just heard this, and then almost like just the experience of being alive, if you're super engaged in it, is like delightful. Is that like a really big belly laugh funny? Not always, but I think it does open up that possibility too.
What is the last time or a time you remember where a dog or your dog made you laugh?
We lived with two dogs, Hilda and Quiddity, and they're sort of differently sized, and they're just really different people. But sometimes they just get it together and have like a great rough and tumble play, and I just lose it. I mean, I just laugh and laugh. It's just funny to me to be kind of affiliated with their pleasure, right? Like it's almost like contagious laughter, even though I can't always hear them laughing in play. Their pleasure is my pleasure. So that happens regularly. But even just silly things they do when one of them needs attention and Hilda needs attention and is not getting it from us, and she'll go and find one of Quiddity's favorite pelican toys and bring it in proudly. And it's just fun to see her manipulating our attention and seeing, figuring out how to work with these like slow humans. That's funny to me.
And is there a dog equivalent to laughter or a dog analog to laughter?
They do have a play pant, right? Which is this sort of breathy exhalation that they do in play, but you have to get like really up in there with them to hear it in their play. It's a kind of sound like a chimpanzee might make in play. They were the sort of original non-human play canters, and then there was a research that found that dogs play cant as well. So we call that a laughter because it's used in laughing contexts, in playful contexts, and it's different than the pant that they use when they're hot or stressed. So yeah, I think they're laughing.
It's also, when you think about kids, human children, some of the first laughs that kids have are from these
very primal types of jokes, right? Like, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna get you, I'm chasing you, or I'm tickling you. Like a play attack that's actually not an attack. That is what gets kids laughing. And it seems like that same type of joke, if we could call it that, is what makes a dog laugh too.
Isn't there also an evolutionary story that laughter and smiling are kind of like fear responses a little bit as well, right? So the chimpanzee, for instance, has a fear grin. Their big grin. If you see a chimp grinning, they're not like a super happy chimp. They're one who's worried about the situation and trying to put on like the guilty look, the teasing gesture to sort of tone down what they see.
I've done that. I walked into a party where I didn't know a lot of people, and they're like, "Oh no, it's time for the big fear grin." Hey, oh yeah, I remember you. Of course, I know your name.
だいぶすっきりしてきましたよ。結構綺麗になったと思いません？わかんないけど。マンゴーちゃんぐらいしか見てなかったかもしれないけど。でもこのライブ配信ってさ、24時間やったらさすがにすげえいっぱい見てもらえんのかな？ 24 時間配信してたら。どう思う？ 24 時間もさすがに配信してればさすがにすごい人が見てくれると思うんだけど。どう思いますか？まあ見てもらったところでってところなんですけど、だいぶ綺麗になったよね。一生懸命こう喋ったんだけど、電池が入ってなかったっていう。そう。こう、だんだん綺麗になってきてね。こうやって配信してやってることによって、自分を奮い立たせるための配信でもあると。そう。配信しとけば、掃除も適当に終わらず、最後までちゃんとやると思い、そう。自分を奮い立たせるための配信でもあるのです。
Two ways that you've suggested that people could shift their own perspective of the world, but also understand their dog better, are one, to experiment with leading your own life first for a little bit of time, but also then to just get down at the level they are, to see that even the visual world is very different from the type of dog that it is from our country.
Same thing with me, frankly, right? And in that book on looking, I walked with a doctor, Bennett Werber, who told me that when he was a child, his dad used to take him around to museums and sort of oblige him to pay attention by coming into a room, having them look, and then asking them to like leave the room and draw what was in the room. So he kind of finds space. And at some point, he also realized that his sons weren't seeing what he was seeing when they looked at the paintings, because he got down to their level and he looked up at the painting that he was asking them to look at, and because of the way the light was situated in the glass connecting the artwork, kids like sometimes can't see the art on the walls. It's just like a big blinding reflection to them. So suddenly you realize this thing that you're asking them to gaze at for hours for edification in the museum is just like a bright light to them, and they didn't see Picasso at all, right? And it's so transformative just to be in this